Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 343 of the All Dolphins podcast on this Tuesday, August 27th, 2024. As you can see, or not see if you're listening on the audio version of the podcast, I am flying solo today. And today was roster cutdown day across the NFL. Every single solitary team, including the Miami Dolphins, had to get down to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern time, which is the time the moves have to be turned into the NFL, not necessarily the time they are announced. We found out the totality of the Dolphins move a little past 5 p.m. And for the most part, it went according to plan. However, as is always the case, there were some major surprises, and we're going to dive into all of this, including the big news regarding Odell Beckham Jr., interesting news the move with Nick Needham, and the twist with the release, perhaps surprising, of long snapper Blake Ferguson. So we're going to get into all that. Let us start with the minutia here. We're going to show you very quickly, for those watching on YouTube, this is the announcement of the Dolphins' moves that they made to get to 53, and I will read them as quickly as I can. Along with you, the Dolphins waived linebacker David Nenny, wide receiver Jaquan Burton, safety Jordan Colbert, defensive tackle Robert Cooper, wide receiver Eric Ezukama. That's a surprising one, and we're going to discuss that one as well. Wide receiver Mike Harley Jr., offensive lineman Chasen Hines, running back Xander Horvath, linebacker Daquan Jackson, wide receiver Jadon Janke, cornerback, I apologize if that's not how you pronounce his name, cornerback Isaiah Johnson, offensive lineman Matthew Jones, cornerback Jason Maitre, tackle Baron Matos, wide receiver Kyrick McGowan, defensive tackle Leonard Payne, safety Mark Perry, and tight end Hayden Rucci. The team also waived injured running back Chris Brooks, tackle Ryan Hayes, and wide receiver Braylon Sanders. Released linebacker Curtis Bolton, long snapper Blake Ferguson, as mentioned earlier, defensive tackle Neville Gallimore, defensive tackle Jonathan Harris, defensive tackle Isaiah Mack, running back Anthony McFarland Jr., and cornerback Nick Needham. Additionally, the Dolphins moved wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr., linebacker Bradley Chubb, linebacker Cameron Good, and offensive lineman Isaiah Wynn to the reserve physically unable to perform list, and placed wide receiver River Craycraft, linebacker Wyatt Ray, and cornerback Cam Smith on injured reserve, listing Craycraft and Smith as designated for return. So a couple of definitions here before we dive into the analysis, and also what is the Dolphins 53-man roster and breaking it down by position. The different terminology between waived and released: players who do not have 4 years of NFL experience accrued are waived and are subject to waivers through Wednesday at noon. And the waiver procedure is any team that wants a player who has been waived can put in a claim. If more than one team puts in a claim, the priority goes to the team on the higher in the pecking order. And the pecking order is basically the same as the draft order for 2024 before trades. So if you recall, the Dolphins were 21st in the draft order. That's where they picked Chop Robinson. That remains the same. And it will remain the same for the waiver priority order until after the third week of the regular season, when it moves over to the current standings. So, and after noon on Wednesday, then those players who did not get claimed can sign with any team. They can sign with any practice squad. They can sign with any 53-man roster. But generally speaking, if you're not getting claimed, you're not going to latch on to an active roster. Also understand that players who claim a player off waivers inherit that contract minus signing bonus, which has already been paid by the team the players belong to. The players who were released are those who have 4 or more years of NFL experience. They do not have to go through waiver. They're immediately free agents, free to sign with any team. Moving on to waive injured. Basically, that means that Chris Brooks, Ryan Hayes, and wide receiver Braylon Sanders will be gone from the Dolphins once they can clear physical, or they reach an injury settlement with the Dolphins. Technically, any of those three players could play for the Dolphins again this year. The only way that can happen, however, and it practically never does, but they would have to reach an injury settlement, and then they would have, while they could sign with any other team in the NFL after getting an injury settlement, the only way they could rejoin the Dolphins would be missing. It's 4 games they would have to sit out, plus a number proportionate to the amount of the injury settlement. It's a very complicated formula there. So, but basically that means that Chris Brooks, Ryan Hayes, and Braylon Sanders are done with the Dolphins. As far as the reserve PUP guys, Beckham, Chubb, Good, and Isaiah Wynn, they will not be eligible to play for the Dolphins for at least 4 weeks, or 4 games, I should say. After that point, they can be designated to return to practice at any time. Once they return to practice, then there's a 3-week window during which, or after which, the Dolphins would have to make a call on whether to move them to the active roster or keep him on PUP for the rest of the season. And both scenarios have happened with different teams. And then we move on to the IR guys designated to return. Craycraft and Cam Smith, they also have to sit out 4 games, and then they can return. This is the Dolphins taking advantage of the new rule, because before this year, you cannot designate a player to return during the cuts to 53. He would have to be on the initial 53, and then the following days, usually when it happened, like for example with Jalen Ramsey last year, was on the initial 53, even though he had a knee injury that was going to keep him out for 2 months. And then the following day, the Dolphins put him on IR, designated to return, which is how he came back. This year, you were allowed a maximum of 2. The Dolphins used those 2 on Cam Smith and River Craycraft. And I have a strong suspicion they're going to use a third one on a player who made the initial 53, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later as well. As for Wyatt Ray, he's on IR the entire year. He cannot play for the Dolphins in 2024. So that takes care of your definitions and all of your moves here. As I guess we can move on to the roster that the Dolphins now have, the 53-man roster. I'm going to show it right here. And again, I'll read it very quickly by position, and then we'll discuss it. We have at quarterback, Dolphins have 2, Tua Tagovailoa and Skylar Thompson. 5 running backs if we include fullback Alec Kingle, the other 4 being Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jeff Wilson Jr., and rookie Jalen Wright. 4 wide receivers. It's an awfully low number, as we're going to discuss a little bit later. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Braxton Berrios, and rookie Malik Washington. 4 tight ends, Durham Smythe, Jonnu Smith, Julian Hill, and Tanner Connor. Dolphins kept 10 offensive linemen on their initial 53. Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, Kendall Lamb, rookie Patrick Paul, Robert Jones, Lester Cotton, Liam Eichenberg, Jack Driscoll, Aaron Brewer, and rookie Andrew Meyer. Defensive linemen, 5 on the 53. Calais Campbell, Zach Sealer, Benito Jones, Deshaun Hand, and Brandon Peely. 5 edge defenders, Jalen Phillips, Emmanuel Agba, Chop Robinson, Mohamed Kamara, and Quentin Bell. 5 linebackers, off-the-ball linebackers, if you will, David Long Jr., Jordan Brooks, Anthony Walker Jr., Duke Riley, and Channing Tindall. 6 cornerbacks, Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, Kader Kohu, Ethan Bonner, Saran Neal, and Storm Duck, also a rookie. 5 safeties, Jordan Poyer, Javon Holland, Marcus May, Elijah Campbell, and rookie Patrick McMorris. The Dolphins kept 2 specialists, kicker Jason Sanders and punter Jake Bailey. So how about we start off with, we're going to start off with a specialist, which normally not the way we would go, but because this involves a twist, and I want to explain what the twist is going to be. And of course, sure, everybody's looking at the Dolphin cuts and going, Blake Ferguson, why in the world would the Dolphins get rid of their only long snapper? They need a long snapper. Didn't they just sign Blake Ferguson to an extension a couple of years ago? Well, yes to all of this. And this is where, remember I mentioned Anthony Walker Jr. The Dolphins could not have 3 guys on the IR designated to return today. What they could do, however, was have the two today, Craycraft and Smith, and then put somebody on IR on Wednesday. And I do not know this for a fact. I have a strong suspicion based on the fact we haven't seen Anthony Walker for several weeks that what's going to happen, and the reason Blake Ferguson was released is that the Dolphins needed the roster spot to carry Anthony Walker on the initial 53 to be able to put him on IR on Wednesday and then have a wink-wink arrangement agreement with Blake Ferguson, which is not unusual, to say, listen, we're going to cut you. And mind you, the extension that he signed was mostly about signing bonus, which he's already gotten. So it's not as if he's getting screwed financially by this particular move. So Dolphins approach Blake Ferguson. Listen, this is what's going to happen. And in fact, the Dolphins did that with John Denny at one point as well. So it's not unusual. And also, as mentioned by colleague Marcel Louis-Jacques of ESPN, the Buffalo Bills did this with none other than Blake Ferguson's brother, Reed Ferguson, who's also a long snapper, and they released him in both 2021 and 2023, re-signed him, and it was done again for the roster manipulation, the ability to be able to put somebody on IR post 53. So again, don't know that for a fact, but I have a very strong suspicion that's what happened with the Blake Ferguson move. And also can't think of another player other than Craycraft Smith and Anthony Walker Jr., who maybe actually I could throw another one here because his injury is a complete mystery right now. Maybe Benito Jones, it could be another one, possibly, who might be in the same boat where he would need to go on IR, but the Dolphins wanted to obviously have the ability to bring him back during the 2024 season. So this is what I would look for Blake Ferguson to be back on the 53. And this is also where, first of all, I should say thanks everyone for joining in. Hope you're going to like this episode. Please like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. This is where I should point out, this is, and I put this out on X, this is the initial 53-man roster. There will be a lot of moves made between now and September 8th when the Dolphins open the regular season against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Some of these moves will come tomorrow, and I'm not even including the practice squad where the Dolphins will fill 17 spots by tomorrow afternoon, one of which will go to Beron Matos because he has an exemption as a Dominican who's part of the International Pathway Player Program. And then the other 16 more than likely are going to include a whole lot of guys who were released. In fact, I wrote a story on Miami Dolphins on SI, MiamiDolphinsOnSI.com, which I certainly encourage you guys to read, on practice squad candidates if they were not going to make the 53-man roster. It includes guys like the aforementioned Hayden Rucci, Jason Maitre, and Isaiah Johnson, the two good-looking rookie free agent cornerbacks. Mark Perry, who was a good-looking rookie free agent safety as well. But beyond that, there'll be other moves as well. So, and I've mentioned this before, it would not surprise me if the Dolphins brought a third quarterback onto the 53 at some point. Furthermore, it wouldn't surprise me if that said quarterback happened to be Mike White, because now the Dolphins have cleared the $3.5 million of his guaranteed salary, of his cap savings off the books. Now they can re-sign him for the veteran minimum. If he's amenable and doesn't get a better offer somewhere else, there you go. You have somebody who's familiar with the system who can serve as a third quarterback. And the issue of whether the Dolphins are good enough at the backup quarterback position is another discussion for another day. I will point out, though, however, since we're talking backup quarterbacks, that with the New England Patriots waiving Bailey Zappi on Tuesday, it leaves Skylar Thompson and Brock Purdy as the only two of the 9 quarterbacks taken in the 2022 draft still with the team that drafted them. Think about that. That's great. And those were the last two quarterbacks taken, both of them in the 7th round. And if you follow the NFL, you probably know that Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant, or was he? He may not have been, but he was the last quarterback taken. I'll have to double check that. Now I'm actually doubting myself. So let's go over the roster position by position, and then provide a little bit of analysis of what we saw in the moves that were made to get to 53 at quarterback. Very basic. Don't even need to discuss it. That was done Sunday when the Dolphins decided to move on from Mike White, or release him at the time, leaving Tua and Skylar Thompson as your 1 and 2. There are teams around the NFL. The Browns right now are carrying 4 quarterbacks. They are said to be shopping or very, very open to the idea of trading either Dorian Brew-Thompson or Jameis Winston. The question, of course, is, are either of them a good fit for the Dolphins scheme? It's really not that simple. There's a bunch of teams who are carrying 3 quarterbacks, one of whom is the Denver Broncos with Zach Wilson reclamation project after his failed stint with the New York Jets. And let's remember the rule: for a quarterback to serve as an emergency third quarterback, he does have to be on the 53-man roster. So this is something that's a little bit of an incentive. It becomes almost a must if you start dealing with some nicks and knacks at the injury position. At running back, the one big move here, I had suggested the idea of perhaps the Dolphins making calls to see if there would be interest in trading Jeff Wilson Jr. In saying that, if I'm suggesting the Dolphins could have gotten something in return, it's because the guy's a good player. And there's nothing wrong with keeping a good player. Again, period. Or if indeed he was shopped and there were no takers. Chris Brooks is a tough one for me. I've always liked Chris Brooks. I think he's got loads of potential. He has gotten hurt an awful lot in the very short time that he was with the Dolphins. And I think ultimately that may have played a role. Maybe the Dolphins decided his running style is going to lead to him always getting hurt, and that whatever skill set he has can't overcome that. I do think the guy has potential to play in the NFL, but that certainly could have been a factor and might have become an issue here. Wide receiver, this one's interesting. Dolphins, like I said before, have 4 wide receivers on the active roster, which is an insanely low number. Hill, Waddle, Malik Washington, and Braxton Berrios. The Eric Ezukama move, yeah, very surprising. He is subject to waivers as a 2022 draft pick. Would not surprise me in the least if he gets claimed because there's a skill set there. If he doesn't, I don't see why the Dolphins wouldn't bring him back at the very least on the practice squad because, again, he's got an intriguing skill set. This was a guy the Dolphins used in a Deebo Samuel type of role in training camp 2023, where I'm going to say one more time, he's not Deebo Samuel, but that's the kind of the role in which the Dolphins used him last summer, and he looked the part. He's got very good open field skills, and he brought you some size at the wide receiver position. You look at the 4 guys right now the Dolphins have, there's no size whatsoever. Also, this is also the place where I'm going to mention the fact that the roster is not finalized. This is only the initial 53. And also where I would mention that maybe this is where the tight ends are going to be a lot more involved in the passing game, and perhaps the screaming need for more help at wide receiver isn't quite there. Odell Beckham Jr. starting on reserve pup. We can't say it's overly shocking. Mike McDaniel told the media Monday before practice that it was to be determined. The determination was made. Obviously, this is kind of a concerning issue as far as exactly what the Dolphins are going to be able to get from Odell Beckham Jr. in 2024. But if the Dolphins have to start the season without him and he can help down the stretch, again, it will have been worth it in the final analysis. But right now, yeah, it does stand out that the Dolphins have only 4 wide receivers on the roster. Tight end, the one interesting move there, the Dolphins did wind up keeping 4, and the 4th being Tanner Conner. We told you he's got an intriguing skill set. He's a guy who's very good as a receiver. He was a wide receiver at Idaho State, and maybe this is where you can look at him. He's almost like a wide receiver based on his skill set, and perhaps you look at that, and maybe that's why it's not perhaps the calamity that maybe some would have you believe, that the Dolphins are carrying only 4 wide receivers. I would expect Hayden Rucci to wind up on the practice squad if he does not get claimed by another team. And we'll see how that goes. Generally speaking, it's not like there's not a zillion waiver claims. I know it's very easy to look at somebody that we liked in training camp and go, he's going to get claimed, he's going to get claimed, he's going to get claimed. Understand that teams have a familiarity with their own guys, and there are generally not a ton of waiver claims around the league on the day after the cuts to 53. The Dolphins had a bunch of them. I think the most they ever had may have been 6 or 7 in 2019, which was the rebuilding / tanking for 2 a year where the Dolphins were churning over the roster like nobody's business, and they were picking up players all over the place. And I do believe it was something like 6 waiver claims they put in for guys just trying to find some gems here and there, and it worked at times. Certainly worked with Zach Sealer when they claimed them off waivers from Baltimore, but that was later in the year in December. On the offensive line, nothing surprising whatsoever except for Andrew Meyer, rookie free agent center, making the team. That one was an eye opener. Personally, certainly did not see that coming. I had the other 9 to me were like very basic, cut and dried as far as who the 9 on the roster were going to be. Dolphins obviously like what they saw in Andrew Meyer. I didn't notice him. Can't say I noticed him one way or another, but I do know that the second team offensive line, for the most part, or the third team offensive line, did not have necessarily great outings in the preseason. So that one's a little bit of a surprise for me. Beyond that, again, nothing stands out. We already knew Isaiah Wynn was going to land on the reserve PUP. So not a surprise there. Defensive line, pardon me. They wound up keeping 5 pure defensive linemen. The big question mark here is what's the health status of Benito Jones? And he hasn't practiced in a couple of weeks. We don't know the nature of the injury. Mike McDaniel was asked about his status for week 1, and it was, optimistic. I'm always confident, but not necessarily a definitive answer one way or the other. But as far as who made the roster, who didn't, that I'm going to do like a little self-brag. I was 5 for 5 on the defensive linemen. Some were surprised that Neville Gallimore, unrestricted free agent signing from the Dallas Cowboys, did not make the 53, in part because the Dolphins gave him $1.8 million guaranteed, but not a ton of money, and he didn't do enough to merit a spot on the 53. So the Dolphins eat the 1.8 to have taken a look at him. But the other ones were pretty clear-cut: Campbell, Deshaun Hand, Benito Jones, Paley, and Zach Sealer. I should point out, however, that T.R. Tart, who the Dolphins released very early in the process, did make the initial 53-man roster of the Los Angeles Chargers, and by all accounts, he was really, really good in the preseason for them. This is a guy, again, who Mike McDaniel said was not a good scheme fit, and they wanted to give him another shot with another team. He's also a guy with a reputation that he can be very good or he can be very disappearing, so to speak. In terms of off-the-ball linebackers, Quentin Bell, Brooks, Long, Riley, Tyndall, and Anthony Walker Jr. Again, if there was any surprise there, and there's not really a surprise, the Dolphins like Anthony Walker Jr. He looked great in the spring, been out for a bit. This is where I'm suggesting that he maybe winds up on IR on Wednesday. Channing Tindall, because of what he brings on special teams and the fact that he closed out the preseason pretty well. He was active. Again, if there are folks out there thinking that that's a bit of a surprise, I don't know if I'd go there. I will say this about the off-the-ball linebacker position. I do feel a little bit bad for Curtis Bolton, only in the sense that the dude played really well for the Dolphins in practice and in the preseason games after signing either very, very early. Yeah, it was very early in camp. Did himself proud. But again, only so many spots. Wouldn't surprise me to see him back on the practice squad. At cornerback, nothing really stands out. Even the inclusion of Storm Duck in the group does not surprise me. As I've said all along, their Dolphins had 3 really good-looking rookie free agent corners in Storm Duck, Isaiah Johnson, and Jason Maitre. I'd have been okay, fine with any of them making the 53. I'd like to see the other 2 back on the 53. Again, because of the nature of teams not necessarily putting in a ton of waiver claims, I have a certain degree of confidence that they both will be available to be put back on the practice squad, but they can play. Beyond that, again, nothing surprising there. The question has been brought up. We should mention the big news among the guys who were cut. And it's not necessarily, it's a big name, and necessarily I had predicted that he would be let go, and that's Nick Needham. Had been there since 2019. In fact, because he was there on the active roster from, I want to say, October 2019. Remember, he started on the practice squad, worked his way onto the 53. He was the third longest tenured member of the Dolphin roster, behind only Jason Sanders and Durham Smythe, who both were members of the 2018 draft class. Sealer is the other one who came in 2019, but he came in December. So Needham had been there for a while and had some good moments with the Dolphins, more so in the slot than anywhere else. But he played some outside cornerback, played some at safety. But things kind of started going south for him as far as Dolphin tenure when he tore his Achilles in that game against Minnesota in October of 2022. And in fact, I spoke to him during minicamp, and he talked about having a couple of setbacks during his recovery, which is why he wasn't ready for the start of 2023. If you remember, he started on PUP. Took him a while to get going, and he said he didn't really feel right until the end of the year. Came back this year. All along, it felt like with numbers of Dolphins that added in the secondary that he was in for a rough go, for a fight to keep his roster spot, and it didn't work. He brings a lot of versatility and being able to play the slot corner. As mentioned, he has experience also at safety, outside cornerback. But the question is, how effective is he at any of those spots? And the question now becomes, of course, who's the backup nickel behind Cater with Needham gone? That a spot Storm Duck can occupy, is that a spot certainly Elijah Campbell can play, has some experience in that role. And Elijah Campbell, somebody who had himself a very, very good training camp and preseason. So he would be the choice there. And among the safeties, Elijah Campbell, Holland, Marcus May, Patrick McMorris, and Jordan Poyer. Nothing shocking there. Full disclosure, I did not have McMorris on my 53. I thought his injury might be an issue. He was spotted with a walking boot after getting injured in a joint practice against Tampa Bay. And if you're in a walking boot, not necessarily a great sign. And maybe he's another candidate to go on IR, designated to return on Wednesday. So as I mentioned, the idea that Blake Ferguson is going to be re-signed, so it could be any one of Anthony Walker Jr., Benito Jones, Patrick McMorris. If your foot's in a walking boot, generally speaking, it's not a 1 week thing. He's a rookie. Would it hurt for him to stay on the sidelines for 4 weeks? So there you go. That could be another possibility. And it's entirely possible the Dolphins are going to put more than one player on IR on Wednesday, which would mean they could either sign people from the outside, waiver claims, or bring back some of the guys that they cut today. So, and who knows? Maybe Nick Needham is one of those. You know, if the Dolphins wind up putting multiple players, including Patrick McMorris, for example, on IR on Wednesday, who's to say they don't bring back Nick Needham? So that's to be monitored. And of course, we go back to Jake Bailey and Jason Sanders as your two specialists. Again, no surprise there. Like I said, I would be very, very surprised if Blake Ferguson was not the long snapper, at the risk of repeating myself. Around the NFL, quick tally of former Dolphin players who got cut, released, waived by their other teams. For those who like to keep track on former Dolphin players, which I do, running back Myles Gaskin and safety Bobby McCain, both released by the Minnesota Vikings. Offensive lineman Jesse Davis, and cue the nasty comments from all of those Jesse Davis haters, released by the New Orleans Saints. I will say this. Yes, I like Jesse Davis. He's a really good dude. Played a lot of different positions for the Dolphins. At times, played out of position, not really a left tackle. Also at times played hurt, taken one for the team. Don't think he necessarily deserved the vitriol he got from Dolphin fans, while understanding he was necessarily a high-level NFL offensive lineman. But really good dude. Anyway, released by the Saints. Chase Edmonds was the running back put on season-ending IR by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Wide receiver Robbie Chosen was released by the San Francisco 49ers. And tackle Julian Davenport released by the Atlanta Falcons. And I hope Dolphin fans remember very fondly Julian Davenport. Why I ask? Because Julian Davenport was one of the 2 players the Dolphins got back when they made the gigantic trade of Laramie Tunsil to the Houston Texans for a whole bunch of draft picks, and 2 players, one of whom was Julian Davenport. The other one was a defensive back by the name of Johnson Batamosi. So that's going to wrap it up. The Dolphins are going to be back at practice on Wednesday. General Manager Chris Greer is scheduled to address the media in the afternoon. Tomorrow, and certainly hope you enjoyed this breakdown. And as always, please like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. I appreciate anybody tuning in the first place. Anything else we can do beyond that is even better. Love it. Heart emoji. Come on, my little heart action here with my Mac Pro, and it's not working, so I'll give it up. Anyway, appreciate everyone watching. Have a great rest of the evening on a Tuesday and a great day Wednesday. Have a great day every day. Thanks, everyone.